I remember the exact moment the shift happened. Not with a slap, not with a scream, but with a silent glance exchanged between my son and his fiancée. It was the kind of glance that told you everything without saying a word. Before we continue, please subscribe my channel for such more stories, and let us know where you are listening in the comments. The kind that made you feel like a relic in your own life. The rehearsal dinner had just started. I was seated near the end of a long white-clothed table in the corner of an upscale Italian restaurant in Charleston. Dozens of polished wine glasses sparkled under the amber lights. Everyone wore tailored suits and elegant smiles. It was Nathan's big weekend, my only son's wedding, and I was supposed to feel proud. I tried. Lord knows I tried. But something was off from the moment I arrived. It started small. My name wasn't on the printed seating chart. They found me a chair near the back, at a table with some of his college friends I barely knew. I waved awkwardly, tried to make conversation about the weather, but I could feel it. I wasn't meant to be part of this world. The suits were more expensive. The laughs were tighter. The toasts were rehearsed, and Nathan, he barely looked at me all night. I had raised that boy alone after his mother passed away when he was 10. Cancer took her fast. I sold our house, moved into a smaller place, took 2 jobs to keep the lights on, and Nathan fed. I never remarried, never even dated seriously. My whole life was him. Baseball practices, spelling bees, science fairs. I never missed a single one. But tonight, as I watched him toast his future in-laws and thank his fiancée's parents for being there through everything, I realized I wasn't even a footnote in his speech. I pushed back the hurt, smiled politely, clinked glasses when expected. Maybe I was being sensitive. Maybe it was just wedding stress. That's what I told myself. Until later that evening, when the real gut punch came. It was after dessert. I was stepping outside to get some air when I overheard Nathan and his bride-to-be, Melissa, speaking just around the corner near the valet stand. "I just think it'll be too much," she said. "He's fragile. What if he trips or something during the walk down the aisle?" "Yeah," Nathan replied. "I was thinking the same. Honestly, it's better if he just takes a seat early. We'll have the groomsmen escort you. It's cleaner that way." "Are you sure he won't be upset?" Nathan laughed. "Come on, it's not a big deal. He'll survive." The old man's had his time. The old man. That's what he called me. I stepped back, heart pounding. I didn't confront them. I didn't make a scene. I just walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the dashboard for what must have been 10 minutes. I wasn't just being left out of the ceremony. I was being erased, and in that quiet moment something inside me shifted. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like Nathan's father. I felt like his burden, and I decided, if that's how he saw me, then I would give him what he wanted. I would disappear from his future, but not without making sure he understood exactly what he lost. The morning of the wedding was still and golden, the kind of day made for photographs and fairy tales. I arrived at the church 30 minutes early, dressed in a navy suit I'd worn only once before, the same one I wore to Nathan's college graduation. Back then, he hugged me afterward, tears in his eyes, thanking me for believing in him. I clung to that memory like a lifeline now, as I stepped through the chapel doors and realized I had no place. Literally, there was no name card for me on any of the pews, just a vague reserved sign up front. Most likely for Melissa's family. An usher eventually walked over, and with the kind of customer service smile you give a stranger, said, "You're welcome to sit over here, sir," and gestured to the far left side, near the aisle, second to last row. I nodded, said nothing, no complaints, no emotion. I just took my seat, hands folded in my lap, trying not to focus on the fact that Nathan hadn't even come over to greet me. I hadn't spoken to him since the rehearsal dinner, not a word, and I wasn't about to chase after my own son on his wedding day, begging for scraps of acknowledgement. The organ music started, and the ceremony began. Bridesmaids filed in like a wave of pastel silk, followed by groomsmen with polished shoes and polished grins. Then Melissa appeared, radiant in white, her father on her arm, walking slowly and proudly toward the altar. I watched Nathan's face. He was beaming, and I wondered if it even crossed his mind that the man who raised him, bathed him, fed him, sat up with him through every fever and heartbreak, was sitting in the shadows, watching the most important moment of his son's life unfold from the sidelines like a hired photographer. When the vows were exchanged, I expected to feel something, maybe a sting of pride, a swell of sorrow, but what I felt was something colder, clearer, distance. There was no mention of family during the ceremony, no honoring of the bride's or groom's parents, no nod to loved ones who had passed, not even Nathan's mother. It was all tailored for appearance, not for memory. After the ceremony, I stood outside, waiting for the newlyweds to exit for photos. Guests buzzed around with champagne flutes, complimenting each other's outfits and hairstyles. No one spoke to me. I was invisible, just another gray-haired man in a suit. When Nathan and Melissa emerged to applause, they shared a kiss for the cameras and walked past me without a glance. Her father clapped him on the back. Her mother pulled them into a group hug. And I turned away and walked to my car. The reception was still hours away, but I wasn't going. I had no speech to give, no table to sit at, and no son who remembered who helped him get there. I sat behind the wheel, the late afternoon light filtering through the windshield, and I pulled out the envelope I had brought with me just in case. Inside was a signed and sealed draft of my revised will, prepared 3 weeks ago, after I started noticing the subtle shifts, the shrinking calls, the growing distance. I'd written it with caution back then, hesitation, still giving Nathan the benefit of the doubt. But now there was no doubt left, and I was ready to finalize it, not out of anger, but out of clarity. By the time I reached home, the sky had turned a dark, dusty blue. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I just walked into my study, sat down at the desk I built with my own hands 30 years ago, and took out the folder from the drawer on the right. Inside it was my life, reduced to papers and signatures, bank records, retirement accounts, the deed to the cabin up in Spruce Lake, and most important of all, the will. I'd had it drawn up by my lawyer, Meredith Cole, a sharp and quiet woman who handled my affairs with the care of a family member. She'd gently suggested that I think carefully before making changes. "It's never wise to cut ties in grief," she said once. "Let time tell you whether it's anger or truth." But this wasn't grief. This was revelation. I spread the documents out on the desk and began reviewing the language again, pen in hand. Every asset, every item of real worth, the lakefront cabin, the pension fund, the classic Ford truck I kept covered in the garage, had originally been left to Nathan. But as I stared at his name now, written so neatly beside each entry, all I saw was a stranger. A man who no longer remembered the sacrifices behind each possession. A man who saw me not as a father, but as an obligation to be managed. I began to cross out his name, one item at a time, red ink over entitlement, black ink for finality. I wasn't just cutting him out financially. I was severing the idea that he was owed anything beyond what he'd already taken. But I wasn't bitter. Not really. In fact, I felt strangely clear, like someone had finally wiped the fog off the mirror. Instead of Nathan, I reassigned everything to a woman named Charlotte Avery. You wouldn't know her. Most don't. But I met her 17 years ago in my classroom. She was a quiet senior in high school, living in foster care after her mother overdosed and her father skipped town. She worked after school, struggled with her grades, and came to me once after class and asked, "Do you think I'm just a waste of space?" I spent months tutoring her, helping her find scholarship options. I even helped her get her first apartment when she aged out of the system. And today, she runs a non-profit for girls aging out of foster care, the kind of woman I wish Nathan had grown into. She calls me Mr. Dak and still sends me a birthday card every year. So yes, Charlotte would inherit the cabin, the accounts, and the truck. Not because she was perfect, but because she remembered where she came from, and because she never once asked me for anything. I finished the changes, signed the bottom, and slid the pages into a new envelope. Tomorrow, I would drop it off at Meredith's office for notarization. Tonight, I would sleep, not with sorrow or anger, but with peace. A week after the wedding, I drove up to Spruce Lake. The cabin sat just north of the waterline, surrounded by pine trees that swayed like old friends greeting me back. I hadn't been there in over a year. The place needed cleaning. The porch had gathered leaves, the shutters creaked, and a family of squirrels had made themselves at home in the rafters. But it was still mine. Mine in the way few things ever truly are. I didn't come up for nostalgia. I came to prepare. This cabin was more than a retreat. It was the last real place Nathan had once loved. When he was young, we'd spend long weekends here fishing off the dock, making pancakes on the old skillet, and sleeping by the fire when the electricity gave out during storms. He used to say, "This is the only place where everything feels okay." I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and let the musty air hit me like a breath from the past. Still intact, still peaceful, still forgotten. I spent the day sorting through old supplies, checking for rot, airing out rooms. In the storage chest beneath the stairs, I found our old fishing rods, one still tangled from the last trip we took, a decade ago. And taped to the underside of the lid was a calendar from 2014, with a single day circled in red ink. Last trip with Dad. I sat there on the floor for a while, holding that moment in my hands like something fragile. I don't know why he wrote it. Maybe it was just a marker in time. Or maybe, deep down, he knew it would be the last of its kind. I stood up and grabbed the notebook I brought with me. Inside, I jotted down inventory. The cabin's condition, what needed repairs, what could be left untouched. I wasn't planning to sell it. I was preparing it for Charlotte. She'd only been here once years ago when she was struggling, and I offered her the place for a quiet weekend to clear her head. She left a thank you note folded on the pillow. Said it was the first time she'd ever slept without locking the door. That note still sat in the drawer beside the bed. I left it there. Before heading back home the next morning, I stood on the back deck, sipping coffee and watching the lake shimmer in the early light. Ducks skimmed across the surface. Somewhere nearby, a loon called out, peaceful, uncomplicated, unlike the days ahead, because I knew Nathan wouldn't stay quiet forever. And when he found out what I'd done, he'd come knocking. Not with apologies, but with questions wrapped in entitlement. But I was ready now. He'd made his choices, and I had made mine. The knock came on a Saturday, late morning. I just sat down with a cup of black coffee and the morning paper when 3 sharp raps echoed from the front door. Impatient, familiar. I didn't need to look. I already knew. When I opened it, there stood Nathan, clean cut in his blazer, sunglasses pushed up onto his head, jaw tight with a half-swallowed storm. He didn't say hello, didn't ask to come in, just stepped past me like he still had a place here. "Can we talk?" he said, already pacing the entryway. I closed the door behind him and followed him into the living room. "I'll cut to it," he said. "I got a call from Aunt Nell. She said you changed your will." I raised an eyebrow. "That's right. And I'm not in it." "You were," I said evenly. "Not anymore." He stared at me like I'd just announced I was moving to the moon. "Are you serious right now?" I nodded slowly. "Very." His jaw flexed. "Why? You really have to ask." Nathan threw up his hands. "Look, if this is about the wedding, I told Melissa not to make a big deal." I held up my hand, stopping him cold. "You stood by and watched your fiancé erase me from the ceremony," I said. "You didn't object. You didn't speak up. You let it happen, and you didn't even thank me. Not once." He rolled his eyes. "I didn't thank you because I didn't think I had to. "You're my dad. That's what dads do." "Exactly," I said. "That's what dads do. And what sons do, or should, is remember that." He stepped back like I'd slapped him. "I was trying to make things easier," he said. "Melissa was worried you'd get emotional. You've always been kind of sensitive." The way he said it, sensitive, made my stomach turn, like being a man with feelings was some kind of defect. I leaned on the back of the armchair, steady and quiet. "You didn't just hurt me, Nathan. You discarded me. You replaced me without blinking." His voice rose. "So that means I don't deserve anything. After all you've done for me, now you want to throw it in my face like a punishment." I looked him square in the eye. "This isn't a punishment. This is a reflection. A reflection of what? Of who you are now." He fell silent, breathing hard. His mouth opened, then shut again. No words came. Finally he said, "So who gets it? The money, the cabin, everything?" I didn't answer immediately. I wanted the silence to settle, to make him feel it. Then I said, "Someone who remembered what it meant to be grateful." He stood there staring at me, like he didn't recognize me anymore. And maybe he didn't. Maybe he only ever saw what I gave him, not who I was beneath it all. He turned without another word, and walked out, the door closing with a thud that echoed down the hall like the last page of a book. I didn't follow him. I just stood still, not because I didn't care, but because chasing him would mean I hadn't learned a thing either. A few days after Nathan stormed out, I got a call from Charlotte. Her voice was warm, steady, like it always had been. But there was a quiet weight in her words this time. "Mr. D, I got your letter," she said. "I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I replied. "I just wanted you to know. You left me everything," she said, almost in disbelief. "Why?" I smiled to myself. "Because you never asked me for anything, and still, you gave me more than most ever did." She was silent for a long moment on the other end. Then, softly, she said, "Would it be okay if I came by?" She arrived the next afternoon, wearing a light gray sweater and a look of nervous gratitude. She brought banana bread, like she used to when she was in college, and stopped by once a month to check in. Back then, she said, baking gave her something to control when the rest of her life felt like chaos. We sat on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the trees sway, the late spring breeze curling through the yard. For a while we just talked, not about the inheritance, or the will, or the cabin, just life. She told me about her non-profit, how they had just helped their 200th girl find housing, how they'd partnered with a local college for free courses, how she still used my old laminated quote on her office wall, "Be the person you needed when you were younger." "You don't know what that meant to me," she said. "Back then, when I didn't have anyone, when I didn't think I mattered." "You did," I said. "You still do." She looked down at the mug in her hands. "Nathan's not going to take this well." "He already hasn't," I said. "But that's not your burden." "Still," she said, "I don't want this to tear your family apart." I leaned forward, steady. "Charlotte, that boy walked away from me long before I changed the will. All I did was stop holding the door open." She nodded, quietly taking that in. Later, I gave her the keys to the cabin. She stared at them in her palm like they weighed more than gold. "I'm not sure I deserve this," she whispered. "You do," I said, "because you never stopped being the kind of person who'd ask that question." We hugged before she left. It wasn't long, just long enough to make me feel something I hadn't felt in years, like I'd finally passed on something that mattered. Not a fortune, but a legacy. It didn't take long for the rumors to spread. By the end of the week, I started getting calls from distant cousins and old friends, the kind who hadn't reached out in years but suddenly remembered my number. "Is it true?" they'd ask, feigning casual concern. "I heard you cut Nathan out. What happened?" I didn't bother explaining. Those who truly knew me didn't need details, and those who needed gossip wouldn't believe the truth. Anyway, But social media, that was a different beast. Nathan's wife, Melissa, posted a filtered photo of the two of them at some rooftop dinner, champagne glasses raised, captioned, "Starting our future together, even when others try to tear it down." The comments were full of vague sympathy and backhanded encouragement. Family doesn't always mean blood. You two are better off without toxic energy. Tough times reveal true colors. I didn't respond. I didn't even comment. But I did sit with it, that quiet burn in my chest as I realized just how easily a son can rewrite history when his father refuses to play the villain he wants. Later that night, I opened a photo album. The old school kind, with plastic sleeves and yellowing edges. There were pictures of Nathan at 5, holding a paper turkey he made in kindergarten. At 10, standing with me beside a freshly caught trout up at Spruce Lake. At 17, in his cap and gown, his hand clutching mine with a pride that seemed unshakable. Where had that boy gone? And more painfully, when had I started becoming invisible to him? The next morning, I called Meredith, my lawyer. "I think we need to prepare for pushback," I told her. She sighed gently. "I figured as much. I've already taken measures to make the will airtight. We're covered legally. It's not just the law I'm worried about," I said. "It's the legacy." "What do you mean?" "I don't want this to become a family feud," I said. "But I won't back down from the decision either." Meredith was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "Would you like me to help you write a letter?" "A letter? To Nathan? Not for court, for closure. Something to be read later, maybe when he's ready." I considered that. A letter. A final word that wasn't delivered through documents or arguments but through paper and ink. "Yes," I said at last. "Let's do that." She agreed to help draft it, and we set a time to meet the following week. That evening, I walked the neighborhood. Just a slow stroll under the deepening sky, past lawns being watered and porch lights flicking on like stars one by one. And I thought, sometimes love doesn't die with anger. Sometimes it just fades, because it was never returned. The following Monday, I sat in Meredith's office, pen in hand, staring at a blank piece of heavy cream paper, the kind meant for formal things, wills, deeds, farewells. She sat across from me, quiet, respectful, giving me space. I'd never struggled to put thoughts into words. I taught literature for over 30 years, but this, writing a letter to my only son, explaining why I'd cut him out of my will, this was different. There were no metaphors strong enough, no structure perfect enough, only truth. So I began slowly. "Nathan, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I imagine you're angry. You have every right to be confused, maybe even hurt. But I hope you'll read this through before you decide what kind of man I was in the end. I raised you the best I knew how. I cooked dinners, taught you to ride a bike, helped with science projects, and stayed up through the flu nights. I showed up, always, even when I had nothing left in my tank, not because I expected praise, but because I loved you more than my own comfort. But somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me. I don't know when it happened, maybe slowly, maybe all at once, but I felt the shift. I felt it when calls became rare, when holidays became formalities, and when the woman you chose to build your life with began treating me like an artifact, something outdated, better boxed up and set aside. I never wanted applause, only presence. At your wedding, I realized I'd become a name on the program. And then not even that. I was erased. So I made a choice, not out of anger, but out of clarity. Inheritance is not a transaction, it is a reflection, and I could not, in good conscience, reflect back the apathy I received. I hope one day, when the heat fades and the noise dies down, you'll understand. Until then, I wish you peace and growth. You were once a boy, I would have given everything to. You still are. But sometimes giving everything means knowing when to stop. Love, Dad, I folded the letter and handed it to Meredith. She slid it into a sealed envelope, labeled it for reading upon my passing, and placed it in a file alongside the will. That was powerful, she said gently. I just nodded. There was no relief, no triumph, only the ache of honesty. That night, I sat on my porch again, sipping coffee under the stars, Charlotte's thank you note tucked in my pocket like a quiet reminder that some connections endure even when blood ones fail. And I thought to myself, maybe legacy isn't what we leave behind. Maybe it's who remembers we were ever here. Summer bled into early fall before I heard anything more from Nathan. The days were calm, predictable. I busied myself with fixing the creaky front porch, volunteering twice a week at the community library, and keeping up with Charlotte's nonprofit updates. She sent them monthly now, little handwritten notes attached to typed reports. Each letter reminded me that I'd passed something forward, even if it hadn't landed where I once thought it would. Then one Thursday morning, I found an envelope in the mailbox with no return address. Inside was a photograph. It was old, nearly 20 years back, taken at Spruce Lake. Nathan, maybe 12 years old, grinning with a half-eaten marshmallow stuck to his cheek, sitting beside me by the fire pit. My arm was around him, and I looked younger than I remembered ever being, stronger, lighter. Tucked behind the photo was a short note in his handwriting. Found this while cleaning the garage. Thought you'd want it. That's all. That was all. No apology, no questions, no accusation, but also no insult, no venom. I stared at the picture a long while. That boy in the photo, he had loved me without reservation, and I had loved him with everything I had. Where had that boy gone? Was he still buried somewhere beneath the pride and defensiveness of the man who stood at my door that day? Or had life hardened him into someone I no longer recognized? I didn't know, but I wanted to. That evening, I sat at my desk and took out a fresh sheet of paper, not the kind you use for wills or final letters, just notebook paper. And I wrote, Nathan, thanks for the photo. I remember that night. You were afraid of the coyotes howling in the woods. I told you they were just calling each other home. You fell asleep against my shoulder that night. Sometimes I wonder if we both forgot how to call each other back. Hope you're well. Dad, I didn't sign it with bitterness. I didn't write it to make a point. I mailed it the next morning without expectation. A few weeks later, I got no reply. But I didn't need one. Not yet. Because sometimes healing doesn't begin with grand gestures. It begins with one memory offered, and one silence broken. The days started like any other, with a chill in the air that hinted at the coming winter. The trees along the edge of Spruce Lake had already shed most of their leaves, and the morning mist moved low and slow across the water, like it didn't want to leave. I parked the truck near the cabin and stood for a long time before I walked down to the bench we used to sit on. Nathan and I, when he still thought of me as the strongest man in the world. The bench was worn, its wood graying, but still held steady under me as I settled in, coffee in hand, silence all around. This place never needed words. It spoke through the rustling trees, the creaking dock, the crackle of fire that once danced between us. I hadn't heard from Nathan in a while. After mailing him that note, the one about the photo and the coyotes, I didn't expect anything, but I did wonder. A father never stops wondering. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the photo again. The same one he sent me, his marshmallow-streaked face beaming, my arm around him, firelight bouncing in our eyes. A moment frozen in time, back when all we had was each other. And that was enough. I didn't hear the car pull up, but I heard the footsteps on the gravel, slow and hesitant. When I turned, Nathan stood a few paces behind me. He wasn't dressed for the cold, thin jacket, no gloves, like he hadn't planned to come, or maybe like he was afraid if he thought too hard about it, he'd back out. You still come up here? He asked, voice cautious. I nodded, when I need to remember things that mattered. He took that in, glanced toward the lake, then slowly walked over and sat beside me. He didn't speak for a while. Neither did I. There's something powerful about sitting side by side with someone when there's hurt between you, not facing them. Just existing in the same space, letting the air carry what words can't. I've been thinking, he said eventually, about what you wrote, about what you didn't say too. I turned to look at him, but he kept his eyes on the water. I don't know when I stopped showing up for you, he continued. Maybe it was gradual. Life got busy. Melissa had opinions. I started believing you'd always be there, no matter what. He paused. But the wedding, that wasn't just a slip. That was me choosing convenience over connection. And you're right, it wasn't the first time. I stayed quiet. I was angry when I found out, he admitted. About the will, about Charlotte, about all of it. But mostly, I was angry at myself, because deep down I knew I'd earned it. That made me finally speak. It was never about punishment, Nathan. It was about truth. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I see that now. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth, my old wristwatch. The one I gave him on his 18th birthday. The one he wore for years before it vanished from sight. I found this, he said, in a drawer. Figured you should have it. He handed it to me. I unwrapped it carefully and ran my fingers over the worn leather strap. You still keeping time with this? I asked, half smiling. No, he said. I think I stopped keeping time with you a long time ago. His voice cracked at the end, barely audible. I didn't offer a hug. I didn't offer forgiveness. I just said, then maybe it's time to start again. He nodded, eyes glassy. And together we sat, the lake before us, the past behind us, and something uncertain but not broken stretching between. Not all wounds heal with one conversation, but some of them begin to close when you sit down and finally look each other in the eye. Nathan stayed longer than I expected. We didn't plan it. We didn't plan it. We didn't talk about it. He just never stood up from that bench, and I never asked him to leave. The sun climbed, clouds passed, and the chill softened into something that felt almost like warmth. After a while I stood and stretched. My knees groaned the way they always did now, and Nathan instinctively reached to steady me. That small gesture, something that would have meant nothing years ago, hit me like a wave. Not because I needed the help, but because he offered it without thinking. I didn't bring much, he said, glancing toward his car. Didn't think I'd be staying. You hungry? I asked. He smiled faintly. Always. We went inside the cabin. The same dusty shelves, the same creaky boards under the fridge. I cracked a couple eggs into a pan and added thick slices of ham I'd brought from town. As the smell filled the cabin, Nathan leaned against the doorframe and looked around slowly. I forgot how small this place was, he said. It was big enough when you were 10 and thought the world ended at the edge of the lake. He smiled. I used to think this place was magic. It was, I said, when we were both trying. We sat down at the table, two men older than they felt, eating like we were back in time. We talked about old fishing stories, how bad he was at tying knots, the storm that knocked the power out for 2 days when he was 13, and how we survived on trail mix and canned peaches. Between the laughs there were silences, but not the sharp kind, the soft kind, the kind that lives between people trying again. After we ate, I walked him out to the dock. He stood there for a while, staring across the lake. She doesn't get it, he said suddenly. I knew who he meant. She thinks I should be angry, that I should fight for what's mine. But I've been thinking, maybe nothing is really mine if I haven't earned it. He turned to me, eyes steady. You were right. I stopped earning your trust a long time ago. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. He took a breath. I'm not here for the money, or the cabin. I'm here because I miss my dad, and I don't want it to be too late. The wind picked up gently, rippling across the lake like a whisper. Then don't let it be, I said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photo, the one of us from that same dock, 2 decades earlier. He handed it to me. "I think I'm ready to start building new ones," he said. We stood there for a long while, not as a father and son with history to bury, but as two men finally showing up, fully honestly, in the present. 3 weeks later, Charlotte came by the house on a rainy afternoon. She had a box of files under one arm and a smile that didn't quite hide the curiosity in her eyes. "I saw Nathan's name on our latest donor list," she said, stepping inside. "A sizable contribution too. Anonymous, but I recognized the handwriting on the check memo." I nodded. "He's been showing up." She set the box down and sat across from me at the kitchen table. The same table where she once cried over college rejection letters, where I helped her draft her first resume, where we quietly celebrated every little victory that followed. "You okay with all this?" she asked gently. "I am," I said. "It's not about taking anything away from you. Nothing changes what we've built. What I've given you, I gave because you earned it. You reminded me what family can look like when it's chosen." She placed a hand over mine. "I'm not worried about that. I just didn't expect a shift." "It's not a shift," I said. "It's a widening. There's room for both of you." Later that day, I updated Meredith. "No changes to the will," I told her. Charlotte remained the heir to the cabin, the accounts, the legacy. But I asked her to attach an addendum, one small item to be passed to Nathan, an old ledger, leather-bound, tattered at the edges. Inside it were handwritten notes from years of life, expenses, birthdays, favorite meals, gas station addresses from road trips, his mother's favorite flower, pages of a life lived in quiet devotion. And on the very last page I wrote, "Legacy isn't what you get when someone dies. It's what you remember while they're still here. If you've found your way back, let this remind you where it all began." Charlotte helped me place the ledger in a small wooden box, tied it shut with twine, and labeled it simply, "For Nathan, when he's ready." The next morning the sun came out, clean and bright after days of rain. I sat on the front porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the world feel new again. Nathan pulled up around 10. No suits, no expectations, just coffee in one hand and that old photo in the other. We didn't talk about the past anymore. We just started building a new chapter, one where no one needed a will to feel remembered, just a chair beside someone who finally understood the value of being there.